welcome back to the hills. This is podcast number 4 of the Ammo podcast series. On the most two recent podcasts, I briefly talked about calling for turkeys in Appalachia and how to do that, the importance of it, what you can and can't get away with. Kind of hit on a few tips that pertain mostly to the Appalachian Mountains. And then basically told you guys to get out there and see what works for you in your area. The most recent podcast, I spoke on the importance of scouting, how that directly correlates with your woodsmanship skills, the importance of it. And I talked about how I believe personally, from my personal experience, that scouting is going to be your number one most irreplaceable tool that you have when it comes to turkey hunting and also any hunting in general. So let's say you took that advice. This is your first year turkey hunting. You took my advice on that. You got proficient enough in calling that you trust yourself to go out there and call to turkeys that you have scouted and you have figured out where they are. A gobbler hammers back to you. He's gobbling. He's on his way into you. Everything's working out. What now? So after it all comes together, you've done your scouting, you've done your calling, and that bird's coming in. The most important aspect to the actual harvest itself in turkey hunting, hands down, is your setup. I don't care what kind of weapon you have, whether it's a shotgun, a bow. I don't care if you're shooting TSS or lead or an arrow. If your setup is botched, the chances of you being successful in that harvest are not that great. And in this podcast, I plan on talking about some things that you can do to make those setups more successful 9 times out of 10. But before we talk about the setup, we need to understand the turkey and how the turkey works. And more importantly, how the turkey's vision works, how a turkey sees. And hopefully with understanding how the turkey actually sees the world around him, it makes you and helps you understand why these setups are so important. So a turkey has a 270-degree field of view, right? And I have a little Jake decoy. He's actually sitting here for a purpose. It's not just decoration. So if you look on this turkey's head, first of all, he doesn't have a very large head. We all know that about a turkey, right? You've got the whole getting outsmarted by an animal with the brain the size of a pea joke that goes around the internet. And there's a lot of truth and validity to it, but there's reasons why turkeys are so successful avoiding getting killed year in and year out. And most of it has to do with his vision. So again, noting how small his head is, right? Now, granted, I do have big hands, but I can cover his entire head with my hand. And even a full-grown gobbler, I can do the same thing. I can actually grab his head with my hand and hide it basically in my hand. And the reason that's important is because a turkey has a 270-degree field of view. Okay, so when you hear 270 degrees, like if you think about a whitetail, that means that they do inevitably have a blind spot in their vision. Because, you think about a whitetail's head, it's, we'll call it the size of a dog for a lack of better reference. There's a bigger space in the back of his head where he is actually, prone or susceptible to not being able to see what's going on behind him. Well, a turkey's head isn't as big. So his 270-degree field of view, or granted, it is still 270 degrees. Math will always be math and geometry will always be geometry. That space behind his head is nowhere near as large as that of an ungulate, so a deer or an elk or anything of that nature. And then all it takes for him to get out of that said blind spot is a simple turn of the head, a little left or a little right. And he's practically made himself have a 360-degree field of view with just the slightest bit of movement, right? It doesn't take much for a turkey to figure out what's going on behind him. So if you hear a 270-degree field of view and you're thinking to yourself, well, that means, if he's got his back to me, I'm safe. No, that's not the truth. Now, granted, when he's got that tail fan up, obviously he's blocking his vision from the back. So, but that's a whole different topic in and of itself. So with that 270-degree field of view, they do have monocular vision, which kind of works to our advantage, but it doesn't. And it's not something we need to get overly confident about or think that we have the upper hand on it. So that monocular vision is basically when so this eye facing me is his right eye. If I were to make movement over here, his eye is basically telling his brain what is going on out of his right eye, and the left eye, as far as talking to the brain and the brain communicating what is going on, this left eye is not important to him anymore. Does that mean that it's not seeing? No, that eyeball is still taking in all that information, but it's irrelevant at this point in time because he just saw movement out of this right eye. So now his brain is focusing on what this right eye's got going on, and it's going to try to put the picture together in his head and determine whether it's a threat or not. Now, where this does affect us as the hunter is because it is monocular, they have a bit of a depth perception issue. So when you're talking about distance, they're having a hard time actually putting together the pieces of what it is that they're seeing. That's actually not advantageous to us. A turkey is a very flight response animal. Think about it. Everything predates on a turkey, from coyotes to falcons to us as humans. I mean, everything from the ground to the sky to, if you're down in Florida, you've got water creatures that will actually, it'd be hard pressed for a water creature, but let's say an alligator has, a turkey feeding close and snap, that's game over for that turkey. So at distance, if you make that wrong move, that depth perception issue is not beneficial to you in the slightest. It's actually disadvantage because he's not 99% of the time going to spend the time to figure out if you're a threat or not. He'd rather be safe than sorry, and he's going to boogie on out of there. So at distance, you are actually more susceptible to that turkey getting uncomfortable, usually, than you are in close range with those little mess ups. Obviously, if you move at close range and he pegs you, it's game over. So don't take that the wrong way. Don't say, well, this guy, Jordan, said that I can move. That's not what I'm getting at all. What I'm getting at is those little gun shifts or moving of a twig or whatever it is. They're not going to take too kindly to that. So some interesting facts about a turkey's eye that actually, you'll hear all the time about how great a vision is, and there's reasons to that. It's not just because they're in nature all the time. There are actual reasons to it, such as they have 6 types of cones in their eyes. So, if you want to get into biology and dig down that rabbit hole, you can. But they have 6 types of cones in their eyes compared to the 3 that are in our eyes. And they have 7 photoreceptors in their eye compared to the 4 that is in ours. So what does that mean to us as a hunter? Well, they can see a broader array of colors. They can see more ends of the spectrum in the color spectrums, right? They can see more vibrant colors, so on and so forth. But they can also see UV. So if you've spent any time watching any sort of advertisements, you've probably seen camo companies that advertise these UV-free clothes. You'll hear all the time about people telling you to wash your hunting clothes in UV-free detergent. All those things are actually, they're not fads. They are very applicable to turkey hunting because a turkey can pick up on UV, and there's not much in nature that puts off UV. So if if your clothes are covered in ultraviolet, coloring, that's going to shine bright to a turkey. Some other interesting facts about the turkey's eyes: they have a nictitating membrane or an eyelid. So what that is it's a transparent membrane. So it's a clear eye, well, not clear, but it's a relatively see-through eyelid that when they blink, they can still see motion. They can still see movement going on. So even when their eyes are theoretically closed, their eye isn't actually closed. So you're not going to catch them in between blinks. They can still see what's going on even in their blink. So with all that said, they do have, some downfalls to their vision, such as they are seeing in 2D, which is why you'll see that head bobbing all the time that they do. When they walk around, they have that little, they're walking around putting and you see that head going up and down, or as they walk in and that head's bobbing. The reason they're doing that is they're trying to bring in more information to basically put together the big picture of what it is they're looking at, whether it's another turkey or a predator or anything of that nature. They have, so stepping away from their vision, talking about the importance of knowing the turkey with the setup, they do have great hearing, but our setup is not necessarily directed towards their hearing. That's just general woodsmanship skills of knowing what noises to make, when, and when to be completely silent, which we may talk about that here in the near future. But for this situation, we're speaking specifically about their eyes and the importance of the eye to our setup. But do keep in mind that their hearing is pretty spectacular. They're very in tune. Obviously, a turkey is a very vocal animal. They communicate, and they're communicating from distance. Obviously, that's how, the majority of us are hunting to them is through calling them. So they have to be able to hear. But in this case, for this particular, conversation today, we're not so much focused on that hearing aspect as we are that vision aspect. And the same goes for a smell. First of all, turkeys definitely do not have the smelling capabilities of a deer. You hear all the time that if a turkey could smell, we would never kill them, and that's the truth. Fortunately, their smelling is not, as in tune as other creatures are out there that are prey animals. So that was a lot of rambling about how a turkey sees, and that's some important information. And if you've got time and you're a nerd like me, I highly recommend just dive into that stuff, because there is first of all, there's a plethora of information out there, of resources out there, people a lot smarter than me that have actually dissected the turkey's eyeball, studied the cones, the retinas, the yada, 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 biology word. And there's some really good information that is pertinent to us as turkey hunters. And the more we can learn, the more successful generally we're going to be. But why are we studying that? Well, we want to know how to beat it. That's the whole purpose of a setup. We need to beat that eye. We have to beat that vision. We have to be in a situation where we are going to win. We can put in all this work from the calling aspect and the scouting aspect, but if we get in there and that turkey sees us before he's in range, it did us no good. I mean, it was a cool experience. Don't get me wrong. Anytime a turkey, communicates with us as hunters or even non-hunters, just communicating with a wild turkey is an awesome experience. But as the hunter aspect and that harvest aspect, we are striving to beat that turkey's vision, which is a hard thing to do. So how do we do it? I was speaking about the UV vision. All right, well, let's hit on that first. So those things that I were telling you are not fads, look into them. If you have the ability, washing your hunting clothes in UV free detergent, I mean, it's pretty gross, but I try my best not to wash my clothes that often. I try to let natural dirts and as gross as that is, I try to let that pack in and kind of use that as that natural camouflage against those UV colors, because I do know that no matter what I do, just because of the way we manufacture items nowadays, there's going to be a little bit of residual UV shining off of my clothes. But trying to wash in those UV clothes, I'm not saying you need to go out there and spend all this money on UV free clothing, but being cognitive of what you're doing while you're taking care of your gear, that is a crucial, not crucial, but it is definitely something that you can do to give you a little bit of an upper hand. Now then, with that being said, don't harp on it. If all you have is Tide from down at the local store or supermarket, that's fine. That does not mean you can't go out there and turkey hunt. Matter of factly, there's nothing that will cause you to not be able to go out and turkey hunt other than you not wanting to do it. Okay, so the important things to look at, and the important things that I look at every time I'm going into a setup. I think the number one thing that I'm looking for in a turkey setup, if at all possible, is shadows or darkness. And how this helps me, think of how or what an eyeball is. It's a photoreceptor. So the way that any eye works is it brings in light, it transmits that light into a picture inside of that eyeball, which is then sent to the brain. The brain processes what it is, and that's how it takes in that information. So if I put myself in a shadow or in darkness of any sort, that helps me. It's not the end all. It is not the cure all, but it definitely helps in that turkey picking up on my UV signatures, seeing me in general, right? Because if it's not being able to pick up those photoreceptors, it's not able to quote unquote see me at all, right? It can. So, I mean, unless you were in like pure darkness, which I don't know how you're going to do that in legal hunting hours, but unless you were in pure darkness, it can still pick up on you. So don't get in the shadow and think that you're invincible, but it really helps you to conceal yourself. Darkness always helps us to conceal ourselves because, as I said, that eyeball is a photoreceptor, right? So shadows, that's I'm always looking for shadows. Every time I'm working a bird or trying to strike one up, I'm always looking for shadows and pay attention to what I'm notice I'm always looking for everything I'm about to mention. So how can we get shadows? Well, large trees. Large trees, typically with the sun at our back, is going to cause a shadow, right? Now, large trees are also going to do something else, and that's cover the outline of our body. So if we can find a tree large enough to, that's larger than our shoulders. Now, listen, I'm a big dude. Okay. I'm 6'1", 250 pounds. So I'm pretty husky. I'm not afraid to eat. It takes a lot to fully cover me from shoulder to shoulder. So am I saying you have to have a tree that completely covers your body? Absolutely not. Please don't take anything I'm saying out of context. But if I have the capability of finding a tree that can cover me from shoulder to shoulder, that just puts me in so much better of a position to be able to conceal myself from the turkey. If I have the sun at my back, it casts that shadow from the tree onto me, right? Which, at that point in time, that gives me that darkness that I was looking for. And also, it puts the sun into the turkey's eye, which, think about driving down the road and that sun casts into your eye. It's really hard to see, right? Not impossible. So that's also another thing that I'm looking for everywhere I go. When I'm calling a bird, when I've got a bird working, I'm looking for those big trees with preferably the sun to my back. And if at all possible, if I strike a turkey, with a locator call, if at all possible, if it's feasible, I want to try to swing around him and get the sun to my back before I start making, my final calling sequences on him to get him to commit to me to come in. Always looking for it. Doesn't mean it always happens. Why doesn't it always happen? Well, sometimes there's not large trees, right? Sometimes you don't have the ability to find a large tree, whether it's the region you're hunting in or you just got, caught in an area that doesn't have large trees, whatever that is. Does that mean you can't turkey hunt it? No. Again, there's no reason that you need to skip working a turkey or hunting a turkey. There's none for it. So what can we do in that situation? There's quite a few things. But in this instance, I'm going to talk specifically on the foliage around you, right? So let's say you're down in the Florida area or something of that nature, and they don't have those big trees down there. Get in a palmetto. Or let's say you're just up in a clear cut. Try to get in a briar patch. Or like us up here, when we clear cut, some of the first things that come back besides those briar patches, or some of the things that didn't get hit in that clear cut, I guess I should say, is going to be those rhododendron patches or mountain laurel, however you like to refer to them. Getting those guys. Even when I'm set up on a large tree, I like to try to bring that foliage in around me, whether it's sticks or grasses or whatever it is. I like to bring it in front of me. And there are times when actually sitting in bushes is more advantageous than posting up on a tree like you see on the magazines. For that very reason that I was speaking of, is I can bring that foliage around me, and I'm basically making it a makeshift natural blind at that point. Without having to lug around a blind, I have inevitably put myself into a blind. Now, there's also disadvantages to it that you have to be careful with, and the biggest one is you can actually limit yourself on your shots, your shooting lanes. So be cognitive of when you do it. If you're setting up with foliage in front of you, make sure you know where your shooting lanes are prior to that bird being within a visual distance of you. So prior to the point of where he can see you, make sure you know where exactly your shooting lanes are. And if you don't have any, make some. Because I have been in many situations where I have set myself up and couldn't get a shot because I covered myself up too well. And that's a heartbreaker right there. So, talking about being in visual distance of you. This is probably one of my favorite aspects, or my favorite, one of the favorite things that I have working for me turkey hunting here in the mountains. Is extremely easy for me to make this happen, and that's setting up in a position where when that turkey is in a position where he can see me, he's in shooting distance. Okay? So basically here in the mountains, when I'm setting up, so let's say that I am comfortable shooting at 35 yards. When I'm setting up, I'm trying to position myself in a way where when that turkey comes up to see that hen that he thinks is calling to him and make her come to him, he's in a 30-yard mark. How do I do that? Well, it's pretty easy here in the mountains, because all I have to do is come down off the crest of a hill 30 yards when he's on a rope to me. And with all of our little rolling hills that we have going, it doesn't take me anything to find a hill where he has to come up to look down into the little ravine or the valley that I'm in to figure out where that hen is at. So a lot of times on my approach, as I'm coming up the hill and I can see where I'm going to set up in the distance, I look up and I go, okay, that tree right there is 30 yards away from that hill. He's coming to me. He's committed. I'm going to try to hit him one last time, and I'm going to go set up and preferably not call again. That doesn't always work. Sometimes I get up there and he gets a little, or, like if he's a cold turkey that's not really wanting to commit, I have to call. But if I can make him, I got a little sidetracked there. If I can make him come up onto that hill to look down to me and he's at 30 yards, even if my setup is not perfect, I'm not in the shadows, I don't have the foliage, I don't have the big tree, by the time his head pops over that hill, I've got him in my sights and the game is over. Some people don't like doing that because they want a turkey to come and put on a show, and that's understandable, I get that, but if we're just talking about stacking the odds in our favor, that is one of my absolute favorite ways to do that. Now, if you're not in the hills, if you're not in hill country, you can still do that. So I was talking about Florida, or, any sort of swamp area, any place you have water, you're basically going to treat that water like I treat hills, and you're going to set yourself up in a position where when he comes around that water, you're at that whatever distance you're comfortable with mark, minus a few yards, and he's in range for you. That's just food for thought. Like I said, some people aren't the biggest fans of that because they're in it for the show, but to me, like I said, I am much more concerned about stacking the odds in my favor to be successful whenever it's time to do the deed on the harvest. Now, tight places. This is one that goes hand in hand with that distance. However, I think it's a little bit more tricky to do, and it takes you really knowing the lay of the land to be able to pull this off. So when I say tight places, basically, like if you're a deer hunter or coming from the deer woods, you've heard the term funnels before. And a funnel is simply that. It's an area that congests down to basically one lane of traffic for that animal to come through. And there's several things that can create the funnel. I'm going to give you an example. So this past turkey season, 2024, and I believe I've spoke about it. I know I've spoke about it at least once here on the channel. But last season in 2024, I worked a turkey in from approximately 350 yards. And as he was coming across the two neighbors' fields, I knew that there was nowhere that I could set up properly, i.e. those shadows I was speaking of, the trees. Like, basically, I was exposed anywhere I sat up. So there's a fence row that has briar that runs down the entirety of it, minus one little 5-foot gap. And there was an oak tree basically 20 yards back from that gap with a slight elevation loss going down to the oak tree. Just enough that way when I sat down, I was no longer visible to the fields. All I had to do was get up on a knee and I could see out through the entirety of the fields, but when I sat down, it concealed me enough that way nothing could see me. So that turkey only had one option, and his option was if he wanted to come into the little oak flat that I was sitting in, he had to come through that gap in the fence line. When he did that, it was game over for him. There was nowhere else he could have come to bust me. So if you're in a situation where you can choke them down and you use that distance that I was talking about to your advantage, your chances of a bad setup getting you in trouble go down tremendously. Now, I'm always looking for the best setup. So everywhere I go, I'm going to be looking for a good setup. And by everywhere I go, I mean every 10 steps I take through the woods, every time I stop to drink water or whatever the case is, take a break, I'm always scanning around me to try to find that good setup, that big tree, those shadows, the foliage, and I'm trying my best not to ever call without having, that setup 10, 15 feet away from me. I spoke about how I had called in the middle of a field once and the turkey gobbled from the tree line, and at that point in time it was game over because all he did was look out into that field and he saw me standing there, clear as day. Even if I hadn't been standing in the field, had I been just sitting there, in the woods with the turkey and he gobbled, and let's say he's only 65 yards away from me and I don't have a setup close by, the chances of me actually getting sat down on the tree to be able to harvest that turkey go down tremendously, unless it's, like I said, within 10, 15 yards. So when you're stopping and you're getting ready to pull out that pot call or that box call or that diaphragm call and call to the turkey, before you do it, look around you. Does that tree work for a setup? Can I set up in that bush right there? What can I do if a turkey, if I call right now and a turkey gobbles at 60 yards, where can I go? And you are constantly wanting to think about that as you're going through the woods. Like I said, as you're walking, and this all just like with the scouting, it all becomes habitual the more you consciously pay attention to it. But until it does become, subconscious, you need to consciously pay attention everywhere you go, every time you stop, right before you call. Where can I go? If a turkey is right there, where can I go? And I think that is one of the things that got me in trouble a lot in my younger years of turkey hunting. Is I would just, I saw all these guys on TV and on the internet, and they're just calling and calling and calling. But you're not seeing all those behind the scenes things where they've already picked out if a gobbler goes off, where am I going to go? You're not seeing that. You're not hearing those conversations. So keep that in mind. I'm not telling you not to blind call, with turkey noises, but before you do it, make sure you have a plan if that turkey is closer than you expected he was going to be. So those are natural setups, right? That's your God-given setups. The things that are always there. You don't have to take it with you. And I honestly and I personally believe, now I'm not trying to gatekeep anything here. I don't care how you like to hunt. My two things, and the biggest, if you take anything away from this channel, the only two things that I preach to hunters is it legal and is it ethical? As long as those two boxes are checked, I don't care how you hunt. Okay? So please do not take anything I'm about to say out of context. But I believe everything that I just mentioned in setups, every turkey hunter should know how to do. Whether you like to hunt that way or not, I believe every turkey hunter should know how to find the proper setup. I think you should know how to look for the tree. I think you should know how to look for the shadows, the sun to your back. Everything that I just mentioned, I think you should know how to do it. But maybe that's not your cup of tea and that's not how you like to hunt. You do have really great and nowadays relatively affordable resources at hand, at your disposal, to be able to make, for the most part, some pretty foolproof setups. Now, they are not 100% foolproof, but they are a little bit easier than natural tree setups, or you get the point. And that's going to be blinds. Blinds, however, do have their disadvantages. One being, if you're on some really pressured area, some really pressured ground, anything that is out of the norm for the bird is typically going to alert the turkey. So there are some ways you can get around that. One being, if it's legal in your area, to go in and preset that blind, and at that point in time, you're basically deer hunting the turkey, which I don't really like to do. If that's how you want to do it, do it. More power to you, and I hope you're successful. And please, by all means, let me know when you are successful doing it that way. But that is definitely one way you can go ahead and get the nerves calmed down on those big toms that are getting the pressure put on them, is to have that blind preset. That way it becomes part of his natural environment. That we have to fall back onto our scouting, knowing where those turkeys are, the common paths that they're taking to and from roost sites, so on and so forth. You don't want to just go out and set a turkey, or set a blind out in the middle of the woods without knowing where the turkeys are, obviously. Another thing you can do with those blinds to help you out in those, like I said, in those pressured situations, is to brush it in. Now that takes time, obviously, and it takes a lot of movement and it takes a lot of noise. So you still, it always is going to boil down to your scouting. But those are definitely two options that you have for those pressured birds. Now there's some places, like if I go right here, which I do quite often when I have my children, but if I go out here on my home farm where the only people that hunt them are me and my 2 kids, and I pop a blind up, it doesn't bother them. And if you're in a situation like that, and that's the way you want to do it, by all means, hunt them with that blind. But keep in mind that just like shadows are not complete darkness, that blind is not the foolproof way of getting away with movement. Yes, you can get away with a lot more, but don't get overly confident and zealous when you're in that blind, because they can still pick that movement off if you're moving around too much with inside that blind, and they come through that open shooting lane, that open shooting window, and you're trying to wiggle around to get on the gun, then the game's over. Okay, and I could go on and on and on about blinds, but those are just some real quick tips I wanted to hit on with blinds, if that's the route you want to go. And then lastly, what I wanted to speak of when it comes to setups today is decoys. Now, again, not trying to gatekeep here. I am not a fan of decoys. I don't like using them. Me personally, in my personal experience, I have had them spook more turkeys than they have actually brought in to me. However, that is not the case everywhere you go. And in instances, they are very, very useful. I will use them occasionally with my children, just because, like I was saying, when I put them in a blind, they like to wiggle around a little bit, and it does, if the turkey is interested in that decoy, it is going to bring his attention and his eyes to the decoy. Like this decoy I have right here, this little Jake that I have. If Mr. Boss Tom comes in and he's not having a Jake out there on his stomping grounds, and he comes in and he's thinking, I'm going to absolutely beat the brakes off of this dude, then that's going to work really well for you, because he's going to get dumb in that moment and he's not going to be 100% aware of everything that's going on around him. However, I've also had it work to the point where, and this is more in fields than it is in the woods. In fields, if that turkey comes in from 200 yards away, and let's say you have a hen sitting out there, and all of a sudden he's gobbling down to her and she's not even moving, if that turkey is a pretty skittish turkey, that's not going to sit right with him, that she's not moving. Now, they do make animated turkey decoys, just like they do for you waterfowlers out there, where they'll twist and they'll turn. And we saw one while we were at Dixie Deer Classic that actually looks like it's feeding. It goes up and down, and I can't for the life of me remember who makes it, but it looks like it's feeding, and it's remote controlled, and they're pretty cool. And if that's the route that you want to go, and that's the route that you like to hunt turkeys, by all means use them, but do understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and understand that they do have weaknesses, and don't get down on yourself if a turkey boogers out because of the decoy. It's perfectly fine. It's just like if you're an elk hunter, calling to a big bull elk, you don't know what happened to him yesterday. He could have got the snot beat out of him. And the same goes for a tom turkey. If you've got a couple jakes set up out there and a feeding hen, maybe, listen, I've seen jakes in larger groups, like let's say 4 and up, that if they're either cocky enough or dumb enough or whatever it is, and they get it in their mind that they want to be dominant, and one lone tom comes in looking for a hen, those jakes can and will push that tom out. So just keep that in mind if you decide to go the decoy route. And then also with decoys here, well, it's always been popular, but it's been all over the internet lately, is reaping, which is another form of a setup. And I've personally done it. I enjoyed it. I did. It was a pretty cool experience. It's not my favorite way to harvest a turkey by any means, but it is a way, and there are a lot of people who thoroughly enjoy it, and because it puts them in close. I know a lot of guys who bow hunt that get the tail fan, the little reaping attachment that you can put on the stabilizer, and that's pretty cool to me, and I actually kind of think I want to do that at least once in my life. The The only thing I'll say about, well, there's actually a couple things I'm going to say about reaping. Same idea with typical, like a Jake decoy. Some toms are not aggressive, and if they see a full stritter coming at them, they're gonna boogie. They don't want no part of it. So keep that in mind. Sometimes it can backfire on you, and also keep. And this goes with regular decoys as well. Like I said, the only two things that we care about here at Ammo is safety and ethics. So keep safety in mind. I personally always try to tell people not to reap on public. If it's legal where you're at, cool, do it, have fun with it, but be very, very cognitive of what you're doing with that decoy and understand that there are people out there with shotguns, and if you're doing it good enough, that's going to look like an actual gobbler coming through that field. I would just hate to be on the other end of some TSS coming towards my face. Same goes with decoys. If you're using decoys on public land, try to set yourself up into a position where if someone were to shoot the decoys, they're not going to shoot you. Every situation is going to be different with that. So you'll have to take that into consideration while you're setting your decoys. And also to and from the field with your decoys, whether it's typical decoys or a reaping fan. Be smart when you are transporting it on public land and keeping, in a bag or mark it with orange tape or whatever you need to do to be safe whenever you are carrying the decoys to and from the field. That's just basic safety stuff, but I just wanted to make sure, if this is the only place you heard someone say it, then I just wanted to make sure it was said. Please, please, please be careful with those decoys. Excuse me. So I'm going to leave you with this. You had a great setup. Let's just say you went out hunting today and you had a great setup and you were successful. You had the time of your life. You're hooked. Awesome. Welcome to the club. Turkey hunting is probably my favorite thing in the world. You've done it. Now you think you have finally figured it out. To an extent you have. But always remember that no two setups, no two turkeys are going to be the exact same. There's a tree right out here on my property that I have now killed 4 turkeys off of. And none of those 4 turkeys came in the same way. None of those 4 turkeys acted the same way. The sun was or the weather in general was different for all 4 turkeys. The time of day was different. The time of year was different. So keep in mind that you have to be constantly flexible, willing to adapt, willing to change, and always learning in everything you do. Now don't let that get you down. That doesn't mean like, oh, I have to relearn how to do this every time. No, it means that you get to, right? We always have to change our vocabulary from have to get to. You get to learn something new every single setup. So when I say that, every time you are successful, even if you have to write a journal, whatever you have to do, me, I'm always self-filming, so I have the ability to look back on hunts past and basically take all that information from every single hunt and put it into my toolbox. And every single time I set up, I try to bring back all of that information and put it towards the next setup. And the next setup. And the next setup. If you take anything away from Appalachian Mountain Men Outdoors, I want you to take this away. Every experience in the woods is a learning experience. Use it to your advantage, because there is no better teacher for woodsmanship skills, whether it's turkey, deer, duck, elk, I don't care what you hunt. There is no better teacher than the animal that you are pursuing. I hope you guys got a little bit of insight to setups and I hope you understand how important they are. And maybe, just maybe, I kind of gave you a little bit of perspective on how to set that up. If I did anything good for you, please hit that like button, subscribe, follow along on the channel. If I didn't, let me know and give your opinion on what you think is a good setup, or even just tell me in the comments how you like to hunt turkeys. My very first hunt of the year is coming up this weekend. I'll be taking my kids down to South Carolina for their youth weekend, so I should hopefully be bringing you guys some footage next week from that, whether we're successful or not. We will be learning some things, so stay tuned for that. But until then, see you on the hill.